Marriage, like an old couch. Comfortable, but sometimes you still find yourself sitting there, feeling lost. Middle age, old enough to know right from wrong, but still vulnerable to a gaze that truly listens. Infidelity doesn't always begin with passion. Sometimes it starts with a question that seems harmless. We tell stories that are not new, but never truly old. Not to judge, not to justify, but to remind you, cheating is not always betrayal. Sometimes, it's just the longing to feel seen, one more time. And now, the story begins. Jason is a Marine, a seasoned officer of the U.S. Navy. At 46, his sun-kissed skin and battle-hardened physique tell the story of a man shaped by relentless waves. He has spent more than 20 years serving his country. Afghanistan battlefields, the Guam base, covert operations across the Middle East, each place left its mark on him. Not all of them visible. Jason has been away from home for more than half of his marriage. He wasn't there for his daughter's first birthday. He wasn't there when his wife fell ill and spent 2 weeks in the hospital. He tried to make up for it with gifts sent home, hurried midnight calls, handwritten letters laced with the scent of gunpowder. But sometimes, effort alone is not enough. Emma, his wife, once studied communications but detoured into fashion modeling at 30. She carries a timeless beauty, full lips always touched with deep crimson, eyes that hold people captive with a single glance. Emma is not the youngest model gracing magazine covers, but she is the most sought after for luxury campaigns aimed at mature women. She works for a major magazine in New York, where time moves fast and loneliness lingers in the cold glow of studio lights. In the beginning, Emma's photos for Jason were always filled with laughter. But over time, he noticed they became fewer, and her messages shorter. The Verve New York building, home to a premier fashion magazine for sophisticated women, stands at the corner of Fifth Avenue, overlooking Bryant Park. Outside, its glass facade reflects golden hues of the setting sun. Inside, it's a world of fabric, the rhythmic click of high heels on polished wood, and powerful voices constantly racing against deadlines. Each morning, Emma walks in wearing a soft beige trench coat, her hair neatly pinned up. No longer the timid intern she once was, she is now a staple in autumn-winter campaigns. Yet, the deeper she steps into this world, the more she feels she does not truly belong. The magazine's photo studio is a silent stage, a place where light sculpts every curve, every expression, where a simple touch, adjusting fabric between a stylist and a model, seems harmless, yet holds the power to stir something unexpected. And there, Emma met Vincent Martel. Vincent is a renowned French designer, a man known as a storyteller through fabric. In his early 50s, his worldliness, coupled with deep-set eyes and a smooth, resonant voice, makes him the center of attention the moment he enters a studio. Vincent does not smile often, but when he speaks, people listen. Emma and Vincent first met during the shoot for his collection Nude Confidence, a series of satin designs that draped loosely over the shoulders, bearing collarbones and backs. The only sounds in the room were the photographer's soft directions and the faint strains of an old jazz record. When Vincent approached to adjust a strap at the back of Emma's dress, his fingers barely grazed her skin. But that touch, light as mist, made Emma feel something she hadn't in a long time, that she was a woman, not just a soldier's wife. The shoot ran later than expected. Outside, rain pounded against the glass, thunder rumbling in the distance, casting a stillness over the studio. Emma sat in the dressing room, her evening gown replaced by a borrowed white shirt, her hair slightly damp from the rain. Vincent entered. No announcement, no entourage, just him, and the subtle scent of cedarwood lingering in the air. "You don't look like the woman who stood in front of the camera today," he said, a faint smile forming. Emma looked up. Their eyes met in the mirror. A fleeting moment, but it lasted just a bit too long. His reflection was clear, eyes carrying a quiet sorrow, yet filled with understanding. The gaze of someone who had seen many seasons of solitude and could recognize emptiness even before words were spoken. She smiled softly but said nothing. Vincent stepped closer, taking a small piece of fabric from his pocket, a loose thread from the dress he had adjusted earlier. "This got caught on your strap. Kept it. I don't know why." He placed it on the table with such gentleness, as if it might shatter. She looked at it, then at him. No words were exchanged, just silence, rare in a world that never stops moving. That night, when Emma returned home, she looked in the mirror, not to fix her lipstick. She looked into the mirror, not to fix her lipstick, but to truly see her face, the woman behind the layers of makeup and rehearsed lines in the studio. And for a fleeting moment, she asked herself, how long had it been since Jason looked at her the way Vincent had today? After that photo shoot, Vincent unexpectedly offered Emma the role of the face of stillness, a fashion line designed for middle-aged women, emphasizing elegance, simplicity, and depth. The offer came directly from Vincent and was approved within the week. "I don't need someone young. I need someone real," Vincent had said in the Monday morning meeting. "And Emma, you carry the silence I need for this collection." They began seeing each other more often. Fittings, styling sessions, creative discussions, layout adjustments. Most of it took place in Vincent's design office on the top floor of Verve, a space flooded with natural light, half-finished oil paintings, and the soft hum of classical music from a vintage record player. Vincent always had chamomile tea ready for her, served in a gray-blue porcelain cup with a silver rim. Emma had never told him she liked that tea, but he remembered from the very first meeting when she chose it from the menu. One late afternoon, as they reviewed the images for a campaign poster, Emma accidentally spilled a bit of tea onto one of the sketches. She gasped in panic, but Vincent only smiled, dabbing at the stain with a cloth before murmuring, "Every mark tells a story. Don't erase it. Maybe it makes things more real." For some reason, his words caught in her throat. Something inside her stirred, gently, but enough to make her heart tremble. She said nothing, just looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time, she let herself slow down in the middle of a chaotic day. They became an oddly synchronized creative duo. Vincent didn't need to say much. Emma understood what his eyes were asking for. Emma didn't need to hide. Vincent was perceptive enough to see the exhaustion beneath the flawless makeup. Professional camaraderie, respectful glances, soft laughter in the late afternoons. Everything made sense. And yet, somewhere between the pauses, the slowed breaths, and the silence that lingered a little too long after their eyes met, something else had begun to take shape. No flirtations, no crossed boundaries, just a connection growing quietly in the space between them. One weekend night, Emma stayed late to finalize the promotional video for the Stillness campaign. The building was nearly empty. Only the warm glow of Vincent's office lights remained, the soft clatter of a keyboard slowing, and the distant sound of jazz drifting through the cracks of the doors. Vincent walked in carrying 2 lattes, no sugar, just like always. "I figured you wouldn't be leaving early," he said, setting one down beside her laptop. "Don't want to go home?" Emma looked at him, hesitating slightly, then shook her head. "It's not that I don't want to." She exhaled softly. "It's just, sometimes, going home doesn't feel like coming back." The words slipped out so lightly, but their weight settled between them. Vincent didn't press further. He sat across from her, silent for a long moment, then said, "I know that feeling. There was a time when I used to sit in my car outside my house for minutes, wondering if I really wanted to go inside." She looked up at him. His words, so honest, they almost hurt. And so, they spoke of things they had never told anyone else. Of Emma's quiet dinners alone, with the TV on just to keep her company. Of Jason's brief calls, just to say he was fine, and, "I love you." Of the nights she had cried in the shower, unsure if she still mattered in anyone's life. Vincent spoke of his marriage, beautiful in magazines, fractured in reality. Of a teenage son who was slipping further and further away. Of a wife who was present in event photos but absent in his life. "We're good at pretending we're okay, aren't we?" Emma murmured, her gaze fixed on the untouched latte. "So good. that we start believing it ourselves. Vincent didn't answer. He only turned his ring slightly on his finger, a small, unconscious habit. A slow silence passed between them, not heavy, not uncomfortable, just the kind of silence that comes when two people finally put down a burden they've carried for too long. That night, as they parted ways in the building's lobby, the rain had begun to fall softly. Emma tilted her head up, feeling the drizzle, then turned to Vincent. He was already looking at her, saying nothing, but in his eyes, for the first time, there was no restraint, no guard. It was the gaze of someone who had started to care, and someone who had started to need to be cared for. Time passed. Their working sessions became a routine and perhaps something more. On a Tuesday morning, during a fitting session, Emma stood on the platform while Vincent adjusted the details of the dress she was wearing. She smiled at him, casually, yet with a slight nervousness she couldn't quite explain. As he crouched down to fix the hem, his hand accidentally brushed against hers. A fleeting touch, seemingly unintentional. But her heart stopped for a second. Neither of them spoke. She could feel the warmth of his hand, just a whisper of contact on her skin, yet it left behind a heat that made no sense. Vincent remained silent, showing no reaction. But for a brief moment, as he stood up and their eyes met, this time the look didn't pass quickly. Emma couldn't take her eyes off him, and Vincent didn't look away either. Neither of them said a word. The space between them was small, yet it felt as if something invisible was holding them back. A gentle breeze, a fragile distance between an accidental touch and a step into the unknown. Emma's heart pounded. She knew she should turn away, withdraw her hand, maintain the necessary distance. But her hand remained there, frozen in that contradictory touch. A mix of closeness and an unspoken guilt stirring somewhere deep inside. Vincent let out a quiet sigh, then took a step back, ending the tension between them. But before turning away, he spoke softly, just enough for her to hear. "We shouldn't be like this." His words pulled Emma out of her reverie. Yet, strangely, instead of feeling relieved that Vincent had maintained the necessary distance, she felt emptier than ever. They continued the fitting session as if nothing had happened. But from that moment on, both of them knew something had changed, even if neither dared to name it. On Saturday afternoon, an unexpected winter storm hit New York. The season's first snow arrived earlier than expected, forcing the outdoor photo shoot for the new collection to be canceled. Models hurriedly left the studio, wrapping scarves around themselves, rushing through streets now blanketed in white. Emma was gathering props when an assistant walked in, looking uneasy. "My car's stuck. I can't get out of the garage. The subway line has also stopped." "What about Uber?" "No drivers are accepting rides, sis. You'll probably have to wait until the snow slows down." Vincent, who had been checking the color palette in the corner, overheard and quietly stepped closer. "I have a car. I'll take you home." Emma hesitated. She glanced outside. The snow was falling heavily, streetlights dimmed by the cold, white curtain. She nodded, softly, like a sigh. "Thank you." The black SUV slid through Madison Avenue in silence. No radio, no conversation. The usually bustling streets were now empty, only the glow of streetlights stretching over the snow. At the third intersection, the car stopped at a red light. Vincent wasn't looking at the road. He was looking at her, and for the first time, Emma felt everything around her. The wind, the hum of the heater, even the rhythm of her own heartbeat, more vividly than ever. "Is your home far from here?" Vincent asked, his voice slightly hoarse. "No, but I don't want to go home yet." She turned to him, looked for a long moment. Then, almost whispering, as if afraid of her own words, she said, "Can we go somewhere? Just for a little while." Vincent didn't answer. He simply nodded and turned the steering wheel, heading west, toward the outskirts, where a small cafe nestled under the trees, almost forgotten in the city's rush. They sat there, in the cozy wooden cafe, by a fogged-up window, 2 cups of hot cocoa, 2 people sitting across from each other, and a distance that was slowly fading. Emma told Vincent about the morning Jason left for his first mission, the way his eyes were filled with duty but never turned back, about the years she learned to live alone, to be strong and cold. Vincent didn't ask much. He just sat there, his deep brown eyes quiet like the winter sea, one hand resting on the table, then another gently covering it. Not rushed, not demanding, just there. In that moment, Emma was no longer a wife waiting for her husband to return from base. She was just a woman, sitting across from a man, in the middle of a New York winter, with a heart that had never been truly seen. The blizzard lasted 3 days, nearly freezing New York in place. Work schedules were a mess, but because some urgent scenes needed to be completed, the studio reopened early for a special night shoot. Under warm golden lights, a haze of mist, and the cold white world outside, Vincent chose Emma for the lead role. She wore a shimmering bronze satin dress, daringly cut to reveal her slender shoulders and graceful curves. The space was quiet. Only the flashes of cameras and the slow breathing between them remained. After the shoot, the assistant left early. Vincent offered to lock up the studio. Emma sat on the long couch, draping a trench coat over her shoulders, her hair still damp, lips dry from the cold. "Are you waiting for a car?" "No, I thought I'd walk for a bit. I like how the city feels after a snowstorm, like it's been wiped clean and gets to start over." Vincent chuckled, warm and low. "Then I'll walk with you." New York after a storm isn't a place for a woman to walk alone. She didn't refuse. They stepped out of the studio, walking along the quiet, snow-covered streets. No car horns, no passers-by, only the sound of their footsteps sinking into the snow and the wind swirling around their lingering conversations. When they stopped in front of an abandoned subway station, with its vintage canopy and time-worn brick walls, they found a place to shelter from the wind. Emma sat on the steps. Vincent stood beside her. She looked up at him. "I used to wish, just once, that someone would stand still beside me, not do anything, just be there." Vincent said nothing. He sat down next to her. Then, as if by instinct, he gently brushed a few snowflakes from her hair. Emma closed her eyes, rested her head on his shoulder. For the first time, she felt truly heard. Not through words, but through the quiet warmth radiating from his presence. A soft melody played from a speaker outside a nearby shop. An old jazz tune, melancholic and nostalgic. She spoke quietly. "If I go too far, would you pull me back?" Vincent looked at her for a long time. His gaze made no promises. It held no warnings. But one thing was clear. They were standing at the edge, between what could still be called accidental and something they could never take back. He leaned in just slightly, their faces so close. She didn't move away. And on that snowy night, beneath an old station roof, with distant music lingering in the cold air, the last distance between them disappeared. The next day, Vincent didn't text Emma. Not a single message. No hint, no question. She checked her phone a few times, something she had never done before. Her chest tightened each time she opened her inbox, only to lock the screen again in silence. Emma wasn't naive. She knew this waiting wasn't just curiosity. It was the deeper fear, the fear of being forgotten. 3 days later, an email arrived from an assistant. Vincent wanted her as the face of an upcoming international campaign, a photo shoot in Tuscany, Italy. It wasn't exactly surprising, but it wasn't entirely coincidence either. During the morning meeting across a room full of people, their eyes met. Only for a second. But Emma knew. Vincent remembered that snowy night. He remembered it well. That evening, she stood in front of the mirror, trying on the long dress for the fitting. Her fingers stopped at the neckline, right where Vincent had once brushed away a falling snowflake. And for the first time in years, as she prepared herself, she wasn't thinking about her husband. There was something she had been avoiding. And now, in this moment, she could no longer deny it. She felt alive again. Not because Vincent was special. Not because the secrecy was thrilling. But because, with him, she felt beautiful. Desired. Like a woman again. That feeling, with Ryan, her husband, had faded long ago. He still loved her, but it was the kind of love built on trust, on phone calls from the military base, on long years of waiting. No more lingering glances that made her feel like she was glowing. No more silent admiration when she stepped out of a dressing room. But Vincent, he didn't have to say anything. One look, one absent-minded touch, and her heart beat faster than it should. Emma knew. She was standing at the edge, and if she stepped forward, there would be no turning back. But she also knew, if she walked away, if she dismissed this feeling as a small mistake, then a part of her, the most alive part, would go silent forever. The Tuscany trip was planned as an art project. Mediterranean sunlight, stone villas, endless vineyards, and golden light as rich as aged wine. The main shoot was set in a historic mansion atop a hill, where Emma and Vincent played the roles of lovers in a romance among the vineyards. That afternoon, when the crew took a break, only the two of them stayed behind to review the shots. The upstairs room was flooded with warm sunlight, the open window overlooking the valley. The air carried the scent of ripe grapes and the soft notes of classical music. Emma wore a flowing white dress, open-backed, her hair cascading freely. Vincent stood behind her, scrolling through the images on the camera. "You know, I hate editing your photos." "Why?" she asked, smiling lightly as she turned slightly toward him. "Because I never know what to fix. Everything is already too real." Their eyes met. Silence. Then he reached out, lightly tracing the base of her neck, where her collarbone dipped. Emma didn't pull away. She only closed her eyes. Softly, the first kiss landed right in that space behind her neck. A place so delicate, so easily forgotten, yet impossible to ignore. The camera slipped from his hands, landing soundlessly onto the velvet couch nearby. Emma turned to face him. The evening light touched her face, fragile yet defiant, like someone who knew exactly what they were about to break, but didn't want to stop. The first grasp of hands, not out of hunger, but from the trembling of a soul that hadn't been held in too long. They kissed, slowly, deeply, without urgency. There was nothing to hide, because here, in the autumn of Tuscany, there was no one else but them. Clothes weren't torn away, but removed with a reverence, as if each layer was another part of their old lives they were finally willing to shed. Their bodies intertwined, not to possess, but to confirm one simple truth. I am still alive. I can still feel. Outside the window, the sun slowly sank behind the hills. Inside the room, breaths quickened, fabric brushed against skin, and fragile sounds broke free. Free from morality, from responsibility. But in that moment, they were not husband, wife, or a third party. Just two people, lonely for far too long, who had found each other. After that afternoon in Tuscany, they did not speak of what had happened. No agreements, no promises, just two souls quietly realizing they had gone too far to turn back. That night, Emma did not return to the hotel. She stayed at the villa, with the excuse of working late with Vincent. The third-floor room where Vincent stayed smelled of aged wood, red wine, and soft French music playing from a small speaker. Emma stood on the balcony, wrapped in a white robe, holding a glass of wine. The moonlight cast a silvery glow over her hair, making her skin appear luminous in the dark. Vincent stepped closer, silent, just standing beside her. "If this ends tomorrow, will you regret it?" she asked without turning her head. "No." His response came instantly. Then, turning to face her, he added, "Because at least I have touched you. For real." He placed a hand on her cheek, then let it trail down to her neck. His other hand tightened slightly around her waist, through the robe. Everything was slow, not out of hesitation, but out of a desire to remember. The robe slipped down. No one pulled it off. It simply fell, as if her very skin had grown weary of waiting. They lay together on the worn leather sofa. The room remained unlit, illuminated only by the moonlight tracing the quiet curves of a woman past 30, and the firm grip of a man who had lived enough to understand. Vincent pressed a kiss to the lower part of her stomach, where faint muscle lines still remained after 2 births. He did not hide his emotions, and Emma did not hide her tears. They were not tears of guilt, but the tears of a woman who, for the first time in a long time, felt truly seen. Not as a wife, not as a mother, not as the keeper of a household, but simply as Emma, a woman, beautiful and being desired. They whispered, not words of love, but soft, low murmurs, the kind that makes the world shrink until it holds only two people. In a breathless moment, Emma whispered his name, so softly, not hurried, not hidden, as if that name was the key to unlocking the last door inside her, one that had been shut for years. Vincent buried his face into her shoulder, exhaling, murmuring, "Do you know, some men don't seek something new. They only try to find what they've lost." And that night, in the scent of wine, in the sound of curtains swaying, they found it again, the feeling of being wanted. The third-floor room was strangely quiet. Quiet, not because there was no sound, but because every sound became too clear. The slip of a robe being undone, the glide of skin against skin, the lingering taste of wine mixing with the scent of perfume at the collar. But the clearest sound was breath. The first breaths, slow, tentative, then quicker, heavier, as if they were both falling into a dream, one they had tried to silence many times. The wind tapped gently at the glass, a faint whistling sound. The curtains swayed. The rug beneath them bore the imprints of knees pressing, bodies shifting, legs trembling, not knowing if from fear or from reaching the peak of a hunger starved for too long. Vincent whispered in her ear, not in poetry, but with a single raw truth. Emma, just that. And it was enough. Enough to make her arch against him, as if her name had never been spoken with so much longing and tenderness before. Each time he kissed her, she did not hold her breath, but exhaled everything, the roles, the expectations, the constraints that had suffocated her for so long. She was no longer a model. She was no longer the wife of a soldier. She was only a woman, being loved, fiercely, beautifully, without restraint. The sound of bodies meeting the sofa cushions, sometimes steady, sometimes urgent. A quiet moan escaping, Emma no longer held it back. Vincent saying her name again, this time at the very last moment, when everything unraveled, like a song reaching its crescendo before dissolving into silence. And then, silence. A silence unlike any other. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something too full to be put into words. Like the retreating tide leaving behind soft, wet sand, where footprints once marked their presence. Vincent pulled the blanket up to cover her, then placed a kiss on her forehead. No one spoke. Only the grandfather clock struck once in the midnight silence, reminding them that time was still moving, and that what had just happened could never go back to the way it was. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, making Emma stir awake. The room still carried the scent of last night, a blend of perfume, sweat, and breath. Vincent had left early. On the table, only a half-empty cup of coffee remained, along with a small note scribbled hastily. "Don't forget you're still yourself. V." Emma stared at it for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the note, as if afraid that someone in the house might suddenly see it. But this house wasn't hers. It was just a stop along the way. Reality was waiting for her at home. By noon, when she arrived home, Emma found her daughter drawing in the living room. The little girl's tangled curls made Emma's throat tighten. It was just like his. That man, the one on the other side of the world, wearing a uniform, sleeping on a cold metal bed, eating canned rations, and writing long letters filled with apologies every day. She had betrayed him, even though no one knew, even though no one said anything. But Emma felt as if every wall in the house was whispering, "I know." Standing in the bathroom, undressing before stepping into the warm water, she looked at her reflection in the mirror, the same body once praised on magazine covers. But now, her eyes couldn't ignore the faint bite mark on her shoulder, the one Vincent had left, a living proof of what she wanted to bury forever. The phone rang. Her husband's name flashed on the screen. Liam, Afghanistan, United States. Emma took a deep breath, dried her hands, and answered, "Love, can you hear me?" His voice, still warm as ever, though slightly distorted by the weak signal. She could hear the noise in the background, perhaps armored vehicles rolling by, or the sound of helicopters overhead. He asked about their daughter, if she had finished the drawing from the other day, what Emma planned to cook for dinner. She answered everything, in the gentlest voice she could, but her heart clenched with every beat. There was a moment when she wanted to scream, "Do you know how lonely I am? Do you know how many nights I stare at the empty bed and feel myself disappearing?" But she said nothing. She only bit her lip, sat down, and looked out at the front yard, where the shadows of trees stretched across the ground like the bars of a cage in the afternoon sun. She thought of Vincent, then she thought of Liam, and then she didn't dare think any further. That day, Emma was in the dressing room, preparing for the spring shoot for La Nouvelle magazine. The white dress hugged her figure. Her hair fell in soft waves. Her lips barely tinted pink. She looked as if she had never known guilt. But inside her heart pounded wildly as her fingers brushed over her phone, checking her messages. "I miss you. The studio will be empty tomorrow night. Will you come? V." Emma meant to delete the message immediately, but she was too late. Kelly, the photography assistant, had seen it. A quick glance, a slight furrow of her brows. No words, but that look alone made Emma freeze for a few seconds. Kelly wasn't the type to gossip, but in this industry, rumors could spread faster than a camera flash. She knew one small mistake and everything could shatter. Not just her career, but her family. That night, Vincent called. For the first time, Emma didn't pick up. He texted, "How long do you plan to keep running? We're not a game anymore, Emma. If I was just filling a void for you, then say it. But if you want to live honestly, I'll wait for you." The message made Emma feel breathless. This was no longer a fleeting affair, no longer a reckless impulse. Vincent wanted to step into the light. But what about her? At that very moment, Liam called on video from Afghanistan. He sat inside a tent, sleeves rolled up, dust clinging to his face, but his eyes were as gentle as the first time they kissed in the college courtyard. He smiled. "You know, I just can't wait to come home. I've counted it 3 more months. I miss you so much, Em." Emma pressed her lips together, then forced a smile. "I miss you too." She had just lied, but she couldn't tell the truth. When the screen went dark, she sat still for a long time. In a fleeting moment, Emma looked around the room. From the wedding photo on the table to the messy drawings her daughter had taped to the wall. And for the first time, she felt herself being torn in 2 directions. One was the illicit love, intense, passionate, awakening emotions she thought she had lost. The other was home, filled with memories, responsibilities, and the people who loved her unconditionally. Vincent loved her as a woman. Liam loved her as his life partner, and she was no longer sure who she was in either world. That night, Emma didn't sleep. She lay in her room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock, each sound counting down to the moment she would have to make a decision. Liam wasn't home yet. He had 3 more months to go. 3 months, such a short time. But for a woman losing herself day by day, it felt like a lifetime. She picked up her phone. An unsent draft. "Vincent, I've gone too far. But the farther I go, the more afraid I am. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of losing my family. I want to cut it off, but I can't. I'm lost. Forgive me, if you still can." She reread it, then deleted it. Typed another line. Deleted it again. In the end, she only left 2 words. "I'm sorry," but she didn't send it. Emma got up and walked to the living room. Outside the glass window, New York lay beneath a thin veil of mist, cold, quiet, and hauntingly lonely. She thought about the first time she met Vincent, the way he adjusted the lapel of her coat without looking her in the eyes, only to glance back as he walked away. The night in the studio, the golden light, the soft jazz, and that first kiss, stolen, trembling, as if they had just stepped into a world that wasn't meant for them. And she remembered the way Vincent once called her the forgotten woman, and whispered, "I don't love you because you're lonely. I love you because you still try to be kind, despite being so alone." His words had cut straight to the deepest part of her soul. Emma broke down. No one saw, no one heard. Only she knew the raw, undeniable truth. She never wanted to betray Liam, but she also couldn't keep living as a shadow beside him. Vincent made her feel desired, seen. Liam made her feel safe, protected. And caught between the two men, Emma was left with only herself. Cold, uncertain, lost. Emma had always prided herself on being a woman who knew how to hold things together. She kept the house clean. She kept her voice gentle. She kept posting family photos on social media every Thanksgiving. She kept Liam reassured on the battlefield. She kept their daughter from missing a single parent-teacher meeting. She kept the world believing that her life was whole. But there was one thing she hadn't managed to keep: herself. Every night, when the lights went out, she lay in bed and felt the presence of an absence. It wasn't Liam's body that made her feel empty. It was the silent distance between two souls that once belonged to each other. Liam no longer asked, "How was your day?" He no longer noticed a new haircut, a new lipstick shade, or the lost look in her eyes when she said, "I'm fine, don't worry." He still loved her, but it was the kind of love that had become quiet, faded, too safe. Like an old coat, warm, but no longer stirring the heart. With Vincent, everything was alive. Every touch made her feel real, made her feel like a woman, like someone who longed, someone who was longed for. Not a mother, not a wife, not the strong woman holding the family together while her husband was away. And yet, guilt weighed on her, because every time she met Vincent, she was lying to her daughter. Every time she left the studio with flushed cheeks, she was betraying the vows she made at the altar. She remembered Liam's eyes the day he held her hand before his first deployment. "I don't know if I'll make it back, but if I do, I just hope you'll still be here." His words, like an invisible chain. Vincent gave her wings. Liam kept her grounded. She stood between two worlds, one of duty, one of desire. Some nights, she wished she had never met Vincent. But on other nights, she caught herself thinking, if only Vincent had come first. March. The snow melted late in New York. Emma stepped out of the studio, her scarf fluttering in the wind. Today's shoot had ended early. Vincent wasn't there. He had sent a message the night before. Just one line. "I think we should stop. Before we can't go back. No love, no sorry." Quiet, just as they had begun. And now, just as quietly they ended. Emma stood on the steps. She thought about calling a car, but instead, she walked, slowly, as if trying to breathe in the ache cracking inside her chest. Every step brought back memories. The dim backstage lighting, the stolen kisses under the stairwell, the whispered calling of her name amid silk sheets and jazz melodies. And Vincent's eyes, the eyes of a man who had a family, yet was just as lost as she was. Looking at her like she was the last heartbeat of a heart that had long been asleep. Emma arrived home. The apartment was the same, silent, tidy, everything in its place. On the dining table lay a postcard. Liam had sent it from Germany, where he was stationed. His handwriting was still neat, careful. "I'll be home soon. Do you miss me?" That night, Emma didn't reply. She simply sat down, resting her head against the back of the chair. A sigh escaped. So light she wasn't sure if she had breathed it out or let go of something. That evening, she deleted every message from Vincent. The photos, the songs he had sent, the unfulfilled promise of an autumn trip to Venice next year. Not because she didn't love him, but because she knew, if this love continued, it wouldn't just consume her. It would destroy everything she had tried to hold on to. She chose to return, not for Liam, not entirely for her daughter, but for herself because she couldn't bear losing herself again. One day when winter returns, maybe, Emma will walk past a fashion boutique, see a design with a familiar touch, catch a glimpse of Vincent's presence in the cut of the fabric. But then, she will only smile and keep walking, Saturday afternoon. Emma stopped by a small cafe on the corner of Bleecker Street, the place where she used to wait alone for Vincent while he was caught up in meetings with his team from Paris. The windowside table was still there, covered with a white cloth, a small vase of daisies, sunlight slanting through the glass. She ordered a latte, no sugar, just like the first day they met. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of early spring and a faint chill against her bare arms. She pulled her beige trench coat closer, the one Vincent had picked for her last year from his collection, as a birthday gift. On the table, her phone buzzed softly. A message from Liam. "I just booked my flight. I'll be home for good by the end of the month." Emma stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she switched it off and set the phone down. She reached into her bag and pulled out a letter. From Vincent, sent from Florence. No name on the envelope, just a single line on the back of a sketch. "If one day you feel lost, come here. I'll be waiting." Emma folded the letter and slipped it into her wallet. She didn't know if she would ever go to Florence, but she kept the letter, like keeping a quiet, burning piece of her youth. A familiar tune began to play in the cafe, a gentle, warm piano melody. It was the song Vincent had once played when they worked late together. No one knew there had been love between them, and no one ever would. But in her heart, there was a melody, one meant for a name she could never say aloud. She took a sip of her now-cold coffee and smiled softly, not because she was happy, but because she had learned how to live with what could never be. Emma stood in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of red wine. In the living room, her daughter, little Ellie, was flipping through an old family album, giggling at a picture of Liam holding her in his dusty military uniform. Liam had been back for 3 weeks. Everything was stable, but something somehow wasn't quite the same. Emma walked into the room, sitting beside her daughter. On the table, an old CD leaned against the record player, Chet Baker's "I Fall in Love Too Easily," the song Vincent had sent her the night they first kissed. In the backstage glow of golden lights, between the hum of sewing machines and the whisper of silk falling to the floor, she didn't play it. She simply picked it up and placed it in a drawer. Inside, a dark silk scarf, a few fashion sketches Vincent had sent, a faded photo of the two of them standing by a wooden bridge in Central Park, the sun setting behind them. That was all that remained. Just small things, but an entire chapter of her life she could never erase. Sometimes, she still flinched at the scent of a familiar cologne in a subway station, or came across an article about a new collection, where Vincent's name remained a legend, and in those moments she didn't cry. She only touched her wrist, where he had once placed his first kiss, a quiet reminder that she had lived, had loved, had lost, and had chosen to return. One day, when Ellie was older, maybe Emma would tell her, marriage isn't always a safe haven. It's a journey of learning how to come back, even after you've lost your way. She closed the drawer. The song never played, but it echoed in her mind, soft, lingering, like a farewell left unsaid. And that was enough.